Welcome to Veritus Group's webinar, Answering Your Top Questions About Mid-Level Fundraising. I'm Rebecca Huron, the Director of Content Marketing and Learning here at Veritus, and I'll be working behind the scenes to help Jeff and Kara present today. I will pass it over, Jeff, to you for an introduction.
All right. Oops. All right. There I am. I've been doing this a long time, 34 years now, Kara. I think I have you beat a little bit.
Barely.
Yeah. But I don't know what I can say other than I absolutely love this work so much. And this is a great one because I love talking about mid-level, especially with Kara, and answering your questions. And this is one of my favorite types of webinars, to be able to answer everyone's questions, because everyone seems to have some of the questions we're going to be talking, answers that we're going to be giving out to some of these questions. So anyway, how about you, Kara?
Sure. It's good to be with you here today, Jeff.
Yeah.
I'm Kara Ansodagi. I'm the Senior Director of Leadership Annual Giving at the American Cancer Society, but I am a longtime Veritus fan. I was a client of Veritus's. I was a member of the Veritus team for a while, and now I'm with American Cancer Society. Jeff knows this. I love mid-level. It is a passion. I love teaching and helping people understand systems and structures that can help them grow in their mid-level programs. And I'm just really excited to be here and talking about this today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeff.
Okay. All right. So before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are at Veritus. Now, some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, our vision is to help nonprofits create a culture and fundraising approach that creates transformational relationships with donors. And this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. We believe that your organization is actually to achieve your mission. That's what you really want to do. And you need to shift how you see donors and their role in your organization, but that you also need to create partnerships internally and within your community. We've worked hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not just our personal opinion. And we formed our recommendations through insight from analysis of millions of donor records. And we've worked with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And we've gotten to know some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who have helped us learn and develop our strategy and our approach. We believe that mid-level programs are one of the best investments you can make right now. And one of the big reasons we believe this is because we've had the pleasure of hearing firsthand the stories of donors who have never been spoken to become significant partners as a result of being connected with a mid-level officer. I can't wait to share some of those, and so will Kara. So with all of that in mind, our promise to you is this: if you follow our advice today, you'll set your organization up to create a successful mid-level program that will thrive, meet goals, and move your donors into major gifts. And we'll talk a little bit about those numbers later. Over the years, we've had the pleasure of working with hundreds of nonprofit fundraisers and leaders, and we know how mid-level programs can really transform your work with donors. In fact, we've calculated results for key clients. And before starting a mid-level program, they had a value attrition of 45%. And after 1 year, their average revenue had increased by 15%. That's a major swing from losing revenue to increasing revenue. And that's just one measurement. Now, to kick things off, we're going to tackle a very common question we hear. Do you need to qualify mid-level donors? So as you know, at Veritus, we are big on qualifying on the major gift side, because we know that major gift officers will only succeed if they have qualified donors in their portfolio. So they go through a whole process to qualify. And so, naturally people ask us, okay, you have this similar system with mid-level. Do you have to qualify people to get into mid-level? And the short answer is no. We consider all mid-level donors on a caseload to be qualified already. In major gifts, we go through a rigorous qualification process where only donors who engage in two-way interaction are put into a caseload. In mid-level, the donor's revenue range is what really qualifies them for a caseload. But one thing I want to say is, I would say the big difference here is qualified for major gifts and engaged is what I would call for mid-level, because that's what you want with your mid-level folks. And to be able to say, I've engaged with these people, they're engaging with me. So that's a little different. So not qualified, but really you want to engage those donors.
And Jeff, I would say sometimes you may hear us say you've qualified somebody for major gifts. What we mean by that is you've had a meaningful two-way connection with them in mid-level. So we know that when they move to that major gifts portfolio, they're already qualified for that major gift officer.
That's right. That's right. Now, to talk through what it means to be placed in your caseload of mid-level donors so you have your qualified group to begin working with, the first thing to think about is your giving range. This may be different for every organization, and typically we see mid-level programs start around 1,000 cumulative for the year. But it could go 500, and I've seen smaller organizations at $250. Yep. You'll also need to determine your CRM output records and fields. This is one of the many areas where it's really critical to be in partnership with your database manager or your IT team. And next, you need to think through your potential donor count. We recommend caseload sizes ranging from 5 to 700 donors. We do not recommend starting at the top of that range when you're first building a caseload. As you're ramping up, you may begin to add more donors, but it's important to not overwhelm the program right from the start. And lastly, take a good look alongside your database manager to ensure your data is clean and to really know the system so you can create protocols for ongoing data cleanup. A big part of your role as a mid-level officer is going to be updating the data as you work with the donors on your caseload. So it's critical to really understand this aspect of the program.
I tell mid-level officers regularly, Jeff, mid-level donors are usually some of the cleanest donors in your database because you're digging in on them all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, once you have your caseload established, you'll begin the introduction series, which is a key step in the process of engaging with donors at mid-level. Engaging, remember that word. This series will help you learn if the donor does or does not want to engage, learn communication preferences, identify incorrect contact information, which is why Kara is talking about how this is the cleanest data. You know, your mid-level donors are the cleanest, and hopefully begin to give you more information about the donor's passions and interests. Now, keep in mind that this is happening over a long period of time. In fact, it could take 6 to 7 months to connect with 1/3 of the mid-level caseload. So along the way, you're mixing in outreach using mail, phone calls, emails, small group video meetings, and other options as available to engage with the donors and begin a relationship. And as you can probably see, many of these are similar to the kinds of communications used in major gift work. So when you're thinking about what to do with mid-level donors, the major gift program can offer some great resources and ideas. And as you think about the one-to-some communication in mid-level, let's set some clear expectation and goals. In the mid-level program, the goal is to learn passions and interests in an effort to build a two-way connection. And as such, you'll likely see giving increase. As part of that relationship building, you'll also learn what you can about the donor in order to identify which donors should move to the major gift program. Let me remind you that it doesn't typically happen right away. It's a process. And as we say to our clients all the time, mid-level is a marathon, not a sprint. Our recommended caseload for mid-level, again, is between 500 and 700 donors. And depending on the number of factors in the caseload, it's fluid. You'll have new donors coming in, some donors will be moving off, and some donors being promoted, and some donors on the mid-level team is cultivated further, maybe in your direct response program as well. Within your mid-level program, it's important to recognize that about 1 in 3 donors out of your entire caseload will say yes to having a relationship with you. But this is valuable information because a large role of the mid-level program is identifying which donors want to build a deeper relationship with your organization. If they want that relationship with you and their giving thresholds or capacity is at a major gift level, they're the perfect donor to move into the major gift program. And the MGO doesn't have to spend any time qualifying them because you've already done it for them. In fact, you're going to be the major gift officer's best friend. And a major part of what you need to do before moving a donor into major gifts is actually qualifying that donor. Also known as simply building that two-way connection, as Kara was talking about earlier, which can be done through that mid-level program.
Jeff, I have to tell you a really quick story. Meaningful connections are part of our goals at American Cancer this year, 30%. And we have one leadership annual giving manager who's already at 83 for the year. So she's at 55% of her goal already. Pretty incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah, pretty incredible. So another question that comes up a lot of the time is what the process really should be for actually moving a donor from mid-level to major gifts. And it's something we absolutely recommend you build out in your business protocols in collaboration with your major gifts and plan giving teams. Mid-level serves as such an important role in identifying donors to move to major gifts. And I think mid-level officers really have to pay close attention to those key indicators that a donor may be interested in a deeper relationship with the organization. Those top two indicators, those top two key indicators, they're going to be their giving. So have they moved to a major gift or just a higher threshold, close to major gifts maybe, and how deep of a relationship they're actually having with your organization, right? How engaged are they? There needs to be really strong collaboration and cooperation for this to be successful and respectful to the donor. And this is a question we get a lot. It's probably one of the most common questions we get I used to get from clients was around this topic. And I just reminded them that if they kept the partnership with the donor at the center of the conversation, it was going to feel really great to that donor. Yeah. It's not about moving them. People say, oh, it's going to feel gross if I move them. It's not about moving them, you guys. It's about transitioning them to someone who can serve as a subject matter expert in their area of interest. So we're actually doing more of this at the ACS now, just ensuring that when donors are moved, we have a warm introduction, right, with the donor at the center of that conversation. So just a quick story. We had 2 donors that were flagged from major gifts to actually move to mid-level last week. And so one of our managers reached out to the major gift officer, and the first donor, she went ahead and she did a warm introduction. They were both copied. She was able to follow up. It felt great, right? The donor's at the center. The second situation, the major gift officer came back and said, you know what, that donor really shouldn't even be a mid-level donor. They're not engaged in this part of the organization. It's not going to be fruitful. And I'm sharing the second story because that is a win to me, Jeff. I feel like anytime we can identify that someone should just go back to the channel that is most valuable to them, right? Whether that's direct mail or something else, and we don't spin our wheels, we have an opportunity to put somebody else on our portfolio that wants that relationship. So to me, that was a really great win.
Yeah. Awesome.
So the first indicators that you should be listening for are giving indicators, right? They're going to be the most obvious indications that that donor might want to be a major gift donor. Some of these things may come up early in the conversations, but they might also take time to uncover. You know, it's important that we're patient and we don't interrogate, but we love curiosity and letting the donor take the lead and opening up with you. You know, that's one of the reasons I think permission-based asking is so wonderful, is it really puts, again, the donor at the center of asking those questions and being curious. Mm-hmm. So some of the giving indicators maybe giving changes you receive at the organization, like an increase in a larger gift, a first-time gift at that mid or major level. But you might also learn something about the donors giving somewhere else, for example, through your prospect research team that really could be an indicator to you. There may be giving indicators that relate to other methods of giving, indications of a legacy gift, like a mention that the donor has put you in their estate plans, their will. As you learn more about the donor, you're probably going to notice that the donor maybe has been giving consecutively for a really long period of time. It's a really great opportunity, regardless, to report back on the impact, recognize that loyal support, and then hopefully through that, we have that two-way meaningful connection that leads to those deeper conversations with the donor. So let's look at some examples of life indicators that might happen. So in those conversations, there's going to be a variety of life indicators that may come up or be a point of discussion that can indicate capacity or interest in increasing the relationship with the organization. You may want to identify a few open-ended questions. Veritus has an incredible amount of open-ended questions that we tend to share. And that really is going to help you learn more about those donors in these areas. So again, let's go back to curiosity. Being genuinely curious can guide you towards those conversations. But emphasizing the respecting of the donor and being intentional about staying tuned into that donor. It's really important we meet the donor where they are. And that's why I think fundraisers, really great fundraisers, Jeff, I would say they have some of the highest EQ of people I know. Mm-hmm. They really meet the donor where they are in that journey. So other topics that might come up, retirement, selling a business. You may know there's going to be a big influx of money, strong connections to the organization. I even think you hear someone has their last child going to college. That needs to be an indicator that in 4 or 5 years, they might actually have more liquidity because their kids are going to be out of college and they might have more income to be able to donate. So if any of these come up, and when they do, you just need to make sure you're making note of them in your system. And that's going to really help guide and identify those donors who may be ready to move to major gifts. So when we look at indicators, the last one is interest indicators. And we'll talk about is just considering all of this together with capacity, what that means. So if a donor has a high capacity and is super involved in your organization or has mentioned that they have a really strong connection in volunteering, attending events, that is an indicator that the donor might be ready for major gifts. So I think we have to think about all of these combined, and we don't always do that, Jeff.
Yeah.
All right. So now the other question I think Veritus gets a lot, when you move them back to direct response, right? And how does that feel to the donor? Well, let's be honest, there's just going to be situations where you need to move a donor back to direct response. And it can feel disappointing, but it's actually really positive, you guys. It's like I said, that win and finding out the donor didn't want to be on a portfolio. It's just as important to identify the right donor to move to major gifts as it is to identify donors who are not interested in a deeper relationship. Then you can put the people on your caseload that really want that relationship. So some of the most common reasons related to the changes in going back to direct response might be changes in giving. They're non-responsive for a long time. Their giving is stagnant. They tell you they don't want a personal relationship with you. I used to tell our clients that the donors saying they aren't interested, count that as your win for the day or the week.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I think what's important though, Jeff, in all of that and thinking through all of that is just making sure you have that outlined in your business protocols, how frequently that cleanup of the caseload goes. So when are you going to look at those? When are you going to make those decisions? Veritus typically recommends twice a year. That's what we'll be doing at the American Cancer Society, the 6-month and 12-month mark. And listening to those indicators from the donor that they're not right for the program along the way, so you can start identifying those donors.
Yeah. Another question we hear frequently is about the kind of communication a mid-level donor should receive. For a lot of organizations, their frame of reference is this enhanced direct response program, which is different than a relational mid-level program. And when you're working with a caseload of 500 to 700 donors, you want to find the right balance of personalization, meaningful connections, and efficiencies. Now, let's discuss another part of a mid-level program, and that's the communication plan. As you are creating your plan, there's some key things to do to help you manage your communication with mid-level donors in a manner that will prepare the donor for the kind of relationship he or she might have in a major gift program. You'll want to tier the caseload similar to what we've shared with you and shift your plan according to tier. For example, you can see under phone touch point protocol that the protocol for calling starts with the most attempts to tier A, and then it descends. This is to keep the focus on tier A donors who are most likely to move to major gifts while continuing to manage and engage with the rest of the caseload. This is very similar to the approach to what we recommend for major gift caseloads. You want to try to mix different contact methods and different types of interaction and engagement so that you're actively cultivating and stewarding your donors, showing them the impact of their gifts, learning more about their interests, excuse me, and putting opportunities to put in front of them. This was a critical part about what we shared about being able to connect with a donor. And you will see some donors, when they're giving, from $1,500, and then we were starting to reach out, and then all of a sudden they turn into a 15,000 donor. It's amazing. And they were, that's because the mid-level officers attentive to the donor's needs, shared impact, and then provided relevant and valuable content.
Jeff, and that tiering is so important because it really lets you think about your A's almost like a major gift donor, right? We always talk about mid-levels 1 to some, and that's accurate. But your A's are almost more 1-to-1. And they're the ones that, because they can move, that you want to build the plans for, that make the most sense for them, that make them feel like they're having that major gift relationship.
Yeah. So here's an overview of the various kinds of touch points we use in our communication plans to engage donors in different and meaningful ways. It's important to note that you don't want to just be sending out a bunch of touch points like an in-house mail vendor. You want to be sending out information that's relevant and of value to the donor, and that's how you get them to engage and build trust. While you aren't personalizing as much in mid-level as compared to major gifts, you'll want to add in some personalization where possible, especially on that tier A. And some ways you can personalize resources for mid-level donors are to pull existing resources and add notes to them, like a newsletter or a program update or annual report. You can also send something your marketing team has created and add personalization by tier. For tier A, that might look like a fully personalized email, while for tier B, it's just a personalized first paragraph. You can also do phone call attempts, especially for tier A, to follow up and get the donor's thoughts on the update you shared. And ultimately, you need to maintain a level of efficiency while beginning to introduce to the donor that what they could experience as a major gift donor to your organization.
That's right.
Okay. So in addition to these 3 main questions we talked about, there are some other common questions that we wanted to answer. Now, the first question for you, Kara, is, should I remove my mid-level donor if I haven't heard back from them? Or if they're not responding? They probably don't want to hear from me, right? So what do you say?
I say, please don't remove them.
Okay.
We tell ourselves stories, right? That if a donor doesn't want to respond, it means they don't want to hear from us. When the reality is they're busy, or maybe they're managing a sick family member. Maybe they're traveling internationally and they haven't gotten their mail in 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. We got to not tell ourselves a story, and instead we need to look at the revenue. We don't remove donors from mid-level if they aren't responding right away. Instead, we let their giving dictate whether they remain on the portfolio. If a donor isn't picking up a phone, but is giving more money, they're responding to us, right? Just because they didn't pick up the phone, they're responding to us in a different way, which is through their giving. And so keep them on your caseload, keep making the outreach. and you genuinely never know when they might respond. I don't know if you remember this story, Jeff, that it's probably been about a year ago. One of the client experience leaders sent an email out that said, a gentleman responded to her major gift officer and said, I got your letter right before I traveled internationally, and I'm just getting back, and I want to thank you for your persistence. I used to work in the nonprofit space, and had I had someone like you on my staff, we probably could have solved homelessness. And yes, I would love to have coffee. And so to me, that was just such a nice reminder for people that you got to stop telling yourself a story.
Right. Right.
Just do the work. Be consistently persistent. That's what we talk about.
Yeah. What about those donors? I mean, there's at some point though, if they're 2 years lapsed, then you might want to, then you'll want to remove them, right?
Well, yeah, that's right. It's the giving indicator. So if 2 years have gone by and they're lapsed, we know that they're just not interested in having a relationship with us anymore. And so that's what we really let dictate those decisions.
Okay. All right. So the next question is, and we talked briefly through the introductory series earlier, but for anyone who's been around for a while, they may have heard our major gifts qualification process. So the question is, what's the difference between qualifying major gifts and the introduction series for mid-level?
Yeah. It's funny. I would say if you look at it, you would say nothing, but the reality is it's also a lot. Yeah. So I'll explain. The introduction series for mid-level nearly mimics the major gift qualification series, at least at first glance. And I think that's probably what's so confusing to people, but there's really two key differences. First, the mid-level introduction series, it really continues through the touch points, no matter if we hear back from the donor or not. So in major gifts, the 7-step series, it ends after that two-way connection's made, because then they're qualified, right? And once qualified, then we actually work to build that deeper one-on-one relationship by planning those monthly touch points for each donor, specific to whatever we learn in passions and interests. Mid-level continues at a one-to-some pace. Again, maybe not for A's, they might be more one-to-one, but throughout the entire introduction series, even if we have the two-way connection with the donor. So we're still trying to build a relationship, and we're still listening for passions and interests, but the communication plan that's built in mass is really what we're going to focus on. And then I would say second, the major gifts qualification process concludes at the end of those 7 steps with the final note. We used to call it the Dear John note. If we don't connect with the donor during the process, we send them that last note, and then we close the process. So we move the donor to another part of the pipeline that's most suitable, whether that's mid-level or direct response.
Yep. All right. So it looks like we have time for one more question. So here it is. Before we get to the audience here. Okay. Let's just say my donor told me they don't want to hear from me. So I remove them from all organizational communications, just like they asked. Is that the right thing to do?
If I say this is a bee in my bonnet, do I sound 90?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, the answer is no. The answer is no. I feel really strongly about it. You don't ever want to remove a donor from direct response if they tell you they don't want a relationship with you. And I will tell you, we've seen it time and time again when fundraisers take donors out of direct response stream, the donor genuinely stops giving because they stop receiving those asks. And if you leave the organization, for even if you keep them in your portfolio and you leave, they stop giving, right? So this is a situation where I really recommend you hone your permission-based asking to better understand what the donor wants. So bear with me. Let me give an example. I would say something like, thank you so much for sharing. You don't want to receive any more communications from me. Do you mind if I ask a couple of follow-up questions to ensure I'm serving you properly? You're going to say yes. And I'm going to say, are you no longer wanting to receive impact pieces that I've been sending? Are you concerned about the number of mailings and solicitations you're receiving from us in general, right? We need to dig deeper with them and not make any assumptions.
Right.
So what if they tell you both, right? Solicitations and impact. Your job is to ensure you keep that donor in the direct response program for at least 1 to 2 times a year. Some organizations have stewardship pieces, and maybe with soft asks, right? Maybe you keep them in there. But I also recommend you look at their giving history and you say something like, I appreciate that you've been so open with me about your preferences. Looking at your giving history, I see we sent you a mailing in November and March. Would you be willing to receive a solicitation around that time just to help you remember that it's your season of giving? It shows that you're paying attention to them. It shows that you care. You're being service oriented. A large percentage of the time, a donor is going to say yes because they appreciate that.
Yeah.
So please don't take them out of direct response.
Exactly. All right. Well, that's a lot of questions, and there's still so much more we could talk about in each of these areas. So let me ask all of you who are listening, if I had a way to teach you how to develop a mid-level program that would move more of your donors into major gifts, would you be interested in that? Raise your hand. Okay, so I can see a lot of people raising their hands. Well, our next course offering for the certification courses of mid-level fundraising starts June 10th and provides a comprehensive training on the system and structure you can implement to create and grow a successful mid-level program by hiring and retaining the right mid-level officer, establishing critical data systems, and integrating the fundamentals for effectively and efficiently managing the mid-level caseloads, including evaluation and reporting, and how to smoothly transition those donors to major gifts. Here's a note from a Veritus Group Academy alumna about how this course impacted her organization's mid-level program. And what Beth is basically saying is that this course gave her everything she needed to create a successful mid-level program because the process and structure we teach helps you identify your donors' passions and interests. Now, if you're looking to grow or start a mid-level program and take your work with donors to the next level, this really is a course you don't want to miss. And if you want to get the $200 off your upcoming course, which starts on June 10th, go to veritusgroup.com/courses and select certification courses in mid-level fundraising and use coupon code May24ML200 on the registration page. All right, so I think now is the time to answer our live questions today. So Rebecca, what do we have?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly mention I've put the link to that course and that coupon code in the chat if you want to grab it from there, but we will also include that in your follow-up emails. So don't worry if you didn't grab it off that slide. So that all is there. And then just a reminder for anyone who joined us partway through the presentation, we will send a recording and a copy of the slide deck out tomorrow so that you'll have access to that. We have tons of questions, so please keep sending them in. I'm super excited for everyone who has already submitted one, and we want to get to as many of these as possible. We had several people actually ask a question about how do you do this if I'm a one-person shop or a super small organization? So Kara, I would love to give that to you first.
So my recommendation would be that you look at your donors and where your major gifts starts and ends, and you look at the donors right before that cohort of major gift donors, and you look at those top 500 to 700 donors like Jeff mentioned, probably 700 because some are going to fall off along the way. And that's where you start. I mean, that's the best place you can start, is looking at that cohort right before major gifts to get as many of your top donors as you can to build your pipeline. Jeff, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's perfect. Yeah. And then you also might, if you're, I'd also look further down the road if you see some high lifetime giving maybe, but maybe they haven't given recently. There might be some folks in there that you could renew as well. So
no, that's such a good point. We do look at, typically when I look at those top donors, I look at the last 2 years, right? So this year, last year, and then we look at that cumulative lifetime. Did someone fall off that gave a lot consecutively you could regain? That's a really big deal if you can get those donors back. We also know that returning donors that give year over year have a much higher retention rate than first-time donors. And so you might want to look at some of those to try to get those returning donors back on your file, because they're probably going to be a little bit more of a loyal donor with a higher retention rate.
Yeah.
Great. We have a question from Liz saying, our organization is just launching our mid-level giving program, and they're currently looking to set some goals for that program. Do we have any advice on ways to come up with retention goals or other KPIs? Kara, I'll let you start.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I'll start, and then you can tell me what you're doing at ACS. But
Okay.
I would start with your baseline. Look at what is your current retention rates with that donor set, your mid-level donors. What is your revenue per donor is another indicator. And then if you have any information of how many donors currently are moving into major gifts from that mid-level group from the previous year to this year, then you'd have a benchmark. If you don't, most people aren't tracking that. But those are the three major ones that I want to look at. I want to look at retention, because you want to either maintain or increase retention rates. Revenue per donor, you want to grow that. Revenue per donor, meaning more donors are giving higher amounts and or giving more often together. And then finally, the other one is what percent of those donors are moving into major gifts. That's what I'm trying. That's what I want to track.
Yep. Same. So at the ACS, we talk about keep, lift, move. So how many donors are we retaining? We are looking at industry standards, and I was just at a benchmarking summit, are actually in the mid 70s. I looked at last year's data. Our returning donors, we retain at about 70%. So that's our retention for this year. Our new donors, we retain at about 25%. So that's our retention number for this year. And those are industry standard. We're lifting through average gift size. So which donors gave last year versus this year and what their average gift size was. We're working at an increase of 5% for our average gift size lift. Move. How many are we moving to major gifts? Industry average, 2 to 3.5% with a mid-level program. We're looking at 2. Last year it was 1%. And we didn't want to make a huge leap this year. So we're looking at 2%. And then I would say meaningful connections, because without meaningful connections, that's not going to happen. And so just putting things in the mail helps, sure, but you really want to learn those passions and interests, get your donor on the phone. So you want to look at having about 30% of your caseload having meaningful connections so that you can make those moves.
Yep.
Great. Thank you both. Another question that a few people had here is around asking in mid-level. So I'm going to read Sarah's question because I think it captures everyone's sentiment pretty well. Sarah's asking, what is the best way to ask mid-level donors for their next gift via direct response with personalization? They have, or something else. They've found that those donors don't click through on solicitation emails very well. So looking for some different strategies and approaches for asking.
You want to take this one first, Jeff, or do you want to?
Sure. One way to do that in mid-level is to follow up on direct response appeals. So, and I would also do this differently by tier as well. So for your A level, within that A level, you'll want to plan for a direct solicitation. In B's and C's, I would piggyback off what's going on in the direct response program and follow up with them either via email or phone calls. Did you get that letter in the mail about this particular offer? Is there anything I can answer any questions? Would you consider a gift? Those kind of things. So
yeah.
I'm not sure. What are you doing at ACS?
We're doing a number of things. We do an anniversary ask around their season of giving. We're grateful that you made a gift around a year ago. Would you consider renewing your support this year? That comes from our leadership annual giving managers. We're updating that a little bit this year to have a personalized story of impact about the way the funding is helping. We are working with direct mail. Our direct mail program has a mid-level segment, so it's basically a pipeline for our group, but some of our donors are in that segment. So we're looking at doing a test in September that would include what our leadership annual giving managers would be asking at year end to see if we can get that revenue in the door quicker. And then it gives us something to follow up on. Anyone who's not in that, we'll do a personalized letter out to. Yeah. So there's a lot of partnership happening.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We have an interesting question from Dale, and this is a little bit related to membership programs, which I know we talk a lot about. We work with a lot of clients that have memberships. So the question is, we're changing our mid-level threshold, which is essentially kind of like a giving circle, or structured that way. They're changing that threshold from 500 to 1,000. When you're in this giving circle, you get a certain amount of benefits. And so they are planning on giving the mid-level donors in this giving circle a year with those benefits. And if they don't increase to the new threshold, they will lose those benefits. What is the best way to explain this to donors without impacting the relationship and potentially excite them to start giving at a higher level?
I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Schreifels.
Who's going to get on his soapbox.
This is his bee in his bonnet. So
yes.
I'm a little confused at first. So you're saying they give to this $1,000 level and they get all the benefits. But if they don't give higher the next year, they lose all the benefits?
So the giving circle is structured right now where the threshold to get into it is 500. They're increasing the threshold to get into it to be 1,000. And so for the donors that are giving under 1,000 presently, or will give under 1,000 in the future, they would no longer be eligible to be in the giving circle.
Well, I don't like giving circles in the first place because it is transactional. It's like, okay, you're now a $1,000 donor, and instead of the tote bag, you now get the monogrammed tote bag, or what, like a higher level kind of a premium. And you get to be invited to this and that and all of those things. And so the donor is not necessarily hooked into the mission any longer. It's about, what am I going to get for the next level of giving? But since you have this already, I guess what I would do is I would just grandfather these folks in. I wouldn't like downgrade them. I mean, you're taking away something, and I would really work on trying to increase their giving based on what you know about their passions and interests, and bringing them offers that are connected to that versus trying to upgrade their giving because of some nicer premium. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Yep.
Kara?
Wonderful. Kara, did you have something to add?
The only thing else I would say is Veritus is very much about being authentic and transparent. And so if you are making this shift, and if there is a reason for the shift, perhaps, listen, the price of everything right now is very high, and you want to make sure that more of your money is being spent on your mission. And so you need to increase the threshold for this membership level. I think it's okay to say that and let them know why you're making that decision if it's for the benefit of the organization.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to get through a few more questions. We've got some new ones that have been coming in. And so Angela has a question asking for some suggestions for keeping mid-level donors giving to general funds or to maybe a specific project, but that they're not maybe deciding one or the other or getting too restricted in their giving. So I know we talk a lot about equivalency language. So I don't know, Kara, if you want to speak about that a little bit.
Our asks tend to just be general and unrestricted asks. And then our reporting back is on the area of interest. And so the more you can do that, I think the more beneficial it is, especially if you have some rules around at what threshold you can restrict. I know a lot of organizations you can't restrict unless it's 10 or 25,000, and that's okay. I think the important thing is that you're reporting back on the difference their funding is making in the area of interest. People want to solve a problem. They want to know how their funding is helping solve that problem. That's your job. And then that brings them joy in return. I think we just have to remember that.
Great. So we have a question about if a donor has on their side unsubscribed from all of your email communication, do you consider them sort of off limits to email communication from the mid-level officer, or do you feel like the donor needs to actively tell you they don't want personal communication as well? So Jeff, I can maybe start with you on that one.
So they've said they don't want any communication or just email communication.
They have
guessing they've opted out of
unsubscribed from email.
solicitation.
Just email?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would reach out to them. If they're in the mid-level program, I would try to reach out to them by phone, and I would try to have that conversation. Is this really still true? I think a lot of times donors have been put on no call, no email lists for all kinds of other reasons, and it could have happened years and years ago, and the donor has no idea that they even did this. And so when you have a conversation with the donor and you're telling them what you're trying to do with that donor, they'll be like, "Oh, of course you can talk to me by email. Here it is," or just text me, or those kind of things. So that's what I would do. I would reach out by phone, and then see if we can reach out by email after discussing it with them.
I also think if you don't have a phone number, because we get that question too, right? Put a PS on the bottom of your letter. PS, I'd love to email you updates, but I want to respect your communication preferences. What do you prefer? Option number 2, when you send them that letter, or after you send them that letter in another touch point, send a 3 to 5 question questionnaire and ask them how they prefer you communicate with them on impact, not the organization, not solicitations, but you specifically when you're sharing impact. That it goes back to not making assumptions and letting the donor directly determine how they are communicated with.
Yeah, good. I like that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we have a question about donors that have been maybe disqualified by a major gift officer. And do we recommend putting those into a mid-level program, and how to kind of manage, where a donor that is being moved out of major gifts should go?
Is the donor engaged? Is the donor not engaged? Have you tried for a long time with the donor? Have you only tried 3 times with the donor? I mean, I think the answer is it depends, even if that's not the best answer, but it depends on where you are in your journey and relationship with the donor. If the reality is it's a $5,000 donor and they're super engaged in the organization, but they just don't have the capacity, then they need to go to mid-level where they can continue to be cultivated and stewarded. If they're a $5,000 donor and you've tried for 3 years, 20 times, and they've never responded to you, they don't want a relationship with the organization, put them back in direct response. So I think you've got to look at this on a donor by donor basis instead of putting any big parameters, around it to say one size fits all.
Yes.
So we also have a question, kind of thinking back to the section of the presentation on indicators, asking, when is moving a donor maybe premature, and how can a mid-level officer be really sensitive to those indicators, and being thoughtful in how they're asking questions around them?
You take it, Jeff?
We're always talking about how good mid-level officers, major gift officers, they have good EQ. You need to be able to assess where your donors are. And so if you have all these indicators you're looking for, but there's also the side of it is what are the conversations like that you're having with that donor? So yes, they may have checked off all these boxes, but something inside of you is telling you they're not quite ready yet for some reason. Then I would go with your gut. And they need more cultivating. I need to find out more about why they're connected before I think they should move on. But it's really this science and art thing. I mean, the science would be, well, they made that $10,000 gift, they're ready to move on. But the art is, but I really haven't had a really meaningful conversation with them. I might have thanked them once and we had a brief conversation, but they're not, I don't know yet about them. I don't know what that gift is about. I want to find out. So it's not just cut and dry.
No, and I remember I had one donor, he gave $10,000 a year, which was major gifts level. But he gave that to 5 other organizations, and I knew at the time he wasn't going to change those giving preferences, that's all he was going to do for us, again, at the time. And he was better served with me getting the touch points because outreach wasn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
And I knew that from my conversation with him, right?
Yeah.
I think, Jeff, sometimes people get either so excited to make the move or so afraid to ask the questions. But I think you need to say to your donor, you know, if you were able to accomplish one thing through your giving this year, what would it be, Jeff? And let Jeff tell you how valuable and important this work is to him and how much he wants to accomplish through this work. That's going to tell you enough, or hopefully will tell you more, to help you start making some of those decisions the right way.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we have a question about the survey piece, which I know we call it a couple of different things, including a questionnaire sometimes. But for this particular individual, they really believe in the value of a survey and the information that they can get out of that, but right now don't have good systems for storing it. Leadership's not totally on board with doing a survey. So what would we maybe coach them to help convince leadership that it is worthwhile to send out this kind of touch point? Jeff, I'll give that to you.
Well, I mean, any information that we can get from a donor is gold.
Mm-hmm.
And so really the questionnaire is really, to me, it's a tactic for you to engage the donor. So sometimes donors, they won't engage on a regular, but now they get this survey. They might get it in the mail. They might get it online at the same time. Depends on the strategy you're trying. But the purpose is getting the donor to stop their busy day and for a minute engage with you. And if you're fortunate enough, you might get other cool information like their contact information changed. They'll tell you how they like to be communicated with. They may tell you what's their favorite thing about your organization, a checkoff box. But to get them to engage with it and maybe check off one thing so that you can come back and follow up is what you're trying to do here. And so your whole goal with your donors in mid-level and major guests is to try to get them to engage. And so this is one tactic. So if I were trying to explain this to my executive director, I'm saying, look, our whole goal is to get donors to say something back to us. We want to know who are engaged. And we do know that those who are engaged with our work are more responsive and will become better donors. And
can I just add 2 thoughts to that, Jeff? One, you're going to get checks back in the mail. Happens every time. Yeah. Donors will save that envelope that you sent them, and you'll get a check back in the mail. It will more than pay for the mailing, I promise. Number 2, your leadership doesn't want to do a mailed survey, perhaps. Add a QR code to the bottom of your introduction letter that says, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, and collect that digitally, right? And then think about how you're going to get that back into your CRM. If it's a cost issue, QR code isn't going to cost you anything.
Yep.
Great tips. So we had a question from a couple of people about if they're considering adding a mid-level officer, they don't have someone right now, and very possibly this person is going to have to be a hybrid role. How do you determine how many donors they should have?
Hybrid between what? Major gifts and mid-level?
Or major
Potentially,
gifts.
or
Mid-level
mid-level and other.
It really, the easiest way that I would determine what your caseload size should be is what percent of your work are you devoting towards mid-level. So if we're saying 500 to 700 full time, if you can do half time, then it's 250 to 350, right? So something like that, and if it's 10% of your time, it means 50 to 75 donors or so. That's how you would determine how many donors should be in your portfolio. Otherwise, you'll be way overwhelmed. You'll never feel like you're getting any traction, and it'll be really defeating to you. I had this question. This question came up last week. I was speaking in Appleton, Wisconsin, and it was all mid-level. And they were all in this boat because they were all doing more than just one thing. They were doing major gifts, mid-level, annual appeal. They were doing it all. And we were able to really help them figure out, okay, I'm going to devote 20% of my time to mid-level. I'm devoting 40% of my time to major gifts, and then everything else I have to deal with. That was how they were able to determine how big their portfolios could be.
Thank you. It looks like we have time for maybe just one more question. So this is going back to something, Kara, I believe that you had spoken about of, when do you keep a donor, even if they're maybe not engaging with you? So the question is, with a portfolio of, let's say, 600 donors, if 200 of them are actively engaging back and talking to you, but maybe 400 are not, but they are still giving, do we recommend keeping all 400 and continuing to increase the portfolio size, or at that point maybe start looking to add staff? Kind of how do you handle that in a manageable way?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you remember, the first metric I gave everyone was keep. You want to keep your donors. And how do you keep your donors? How do you retain your donors? And that's by putting them on a caseload and building a relationship with them and cultivating and stewarding them. So the answer is yes, those 400 you do want to keep. Now, the caveat to that would be, do you have a lot of other donors that you could be looking at that might also need to be on a portfolio? If you can't bring on another staff, what can you do to automate some of these donors that you're trying to keep that aren't growing over 2 years? You want to give them a couple of years to grow, to build a relationship. Let's say 2 years have passed and it's 500, and that's all they've ever given and they haven't increased. Well, what kind of automated system can you put them in that still has touch points that allows them to be cultivated and stewarded in a different way so that you can build up more of those other $500 donors that want a relationship? So I think it depends on the department, the organization, and what your resources are. But whatever you do, don't get rid of them and do nothing with them, because that's how you attrit donors first and foremost.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're at time. Thank you all so much for your great questions and for your participation in this webinar. I have put the course information as well as the coupon code in the chat again. You can scan the QR code on the screen if you'd like to. The next course starts on June 10th. And just as a final reminder, we will be sending a recording and a slide deck out tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you all so much for your time today, and I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday.